He wasn't a federal agent. He wasn't armed. He didn't even speak. But when a German shepherd named Shadow stood in front of a moving airplane and refused to budge, he did what no machine, no scanner, no protocol ever could. He stopped an invisible crime in its tracks. What followed exposed a conspiracy buried deep in power, protected by silence, and brought justice through the nose of an unlikely hero. A soft drizzle fell from the overcast skies above Seattle-Tacoma International Airport that morning, casting a silver sheen over the tarmac as low-hanging clouds drifted slowly across the horizon. The wind carried the bite of February air, damp and restless, stirring the flags that lined the perimeter fences. It was the kind of morning that demanded caution, cold enough to numb the senses, quiet enough to mask danger. At Gate 27B, Flight SC-1137 to Atlanta was preparing for departure, a Boeing 787 sitting proud and gleaming under the dull light. Ground crews loaded luggage with mechanical rhythm while cabin crew gave their final checks. In the cockpit, Captain Greg Wallace glanced at the digital clock above the panel, 9:42 a.m., still on schedule. Greg was 50 years old, broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, with streaks of gray framing the sides of his close-cropped dark hair. A pronounced jaw and permanent lines around his eyes hinted at decades of long-haul flights and weathered skies. Known among his peers for his steadiness and attention to protocol, Greg was not a man easily rattled. His co-pilot, a younger man named Vincent Truitt, was going over their checklist, but Greg's eyes were drawn to the front through the cockpit window where something wasn't right. A figure had stepped onto the runway, four-legged, golden-coated, and unmoving. At first glance, it seemed like a stray, but the vest around its body quickly dismissed that thought. It was a K9, and it was blocking their path. The German shepherd stood with his paws square, chest puffed slightly forward, tail straight down. Not wagging, not aggressive, but alert. His ears were upright, twitching ever so subtly, and his deep amber eyes locked onto the aircraft's front gear like it had committed a crime. That dog wasn't wandering. He was waiting. The K9 unit's handler emerged moments later, jogging from the cargo lane with an unmistakable urgency in his step. Ben Carter, 38, wore the dark green tactical vest of airport security and a beanie that clung to his short-cropped brown hair. He was lean, with long limbs and a cautious gait, the kind of man who moved like he always had a backup plan. His jaw was clean-shaven but shadowed by worry, and his brows were pulled tight as he approached his partner. Ben had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Army, working in logistics and later switching to K9 operations, after witnessing how explosive detection dogs saved lives. The war had sharpened him, but also closed him off. He rarely spoke more than necessary, preferred dogs over people, and trusted his instincts above all. Shadow, the 4-year-old German shepherd he trained from a pup, was more than a working partner. He was Ben's reason to stay grounded. "Shadow!" Ben called out, his breath visible in the air. But the dog didn't move. Not an inch. Shadow was no ordinary German shepherd. He had a dark sable coat with a black saddle and a patch of white near his left ear. He stood tall and muscular, with a keen intelligence that glimmered in his gaze. Trained in scent detection and behavioral response, Shadow had passed every test thrown at him, except he never barked. That was his quirk. Silent alerts only. Tail stiffness, fixed stares, paw lifts. This was one of those times. Ben slowed his pace as he approached, kneeling slightly. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Shadow took one step forward, sniffed the air, and let out a low, guttural rumble. Not a growl, but a warning. Inside the terminal, amidst the hum of boarding announcements, a woman in a black trench coat was typing furiously at her laptop. Emily Harris, 34, had the composed elegance of someone who never fully relaxed. She was tall and slender, with chestnut brown hair pinned into a loose bun and eyes the color of stormy gray. Her complexion was pale but sharp with contrast, always a hint of intensity behind her glance. She worked for the New York Sentinel, specializing in corporate crime, whistleblower exposés, and the occasional deep dive into federal overreach. Recently, she had wrapped up a 3-month series on industrial espionage involving defense contractors, and she was heading home with sore fingers and folders full of non-disclosure. A notification dinged on her phone. "Final call, Flight SE-1137 to Atlanta, Gate 27B." She closed her laptop, her instincts prickling. Something about today didn't sit right. Maybe it was the mist. Or maybe it was just muscle memory from years of listening to her gut. She tucked her press badge into her bag and walked briskly toward the gate. Back on the tarmac, Greg radioed the control tower. "Tower, this is SC-1137. We've got a K9 blocking the front wheel path. Do we have confirmation on ground activity?" The response came seconds later. "SC-1137, hold position. We're checking with security. Do not advance." Greg leaned back in his seat, exchanging glances with Vincent. "This ever happened to you?" "Only with seagulls," Vincent replied. Ben approached the nose of the aircraft, still trailing Shadow on a tight leash. "He's not budging," he told the tarmac supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Denise who was already frowning. "We're 10 minutes behind," she said flatly. "We don't have time for this." "I'm not moving him unless I understand what he's alerting on," Ben replied. "His training's never been off." "You think there's a bomb?" she asked, half sarcastic. "I think there's something," Ben replied, staring at the cargo hold directly beneath the aircraft. Shadow sniffed once more, then sat down. His final signal. Whatever it was in that plane. Emily had just reached the jet bridge when she noticed passengers crowding around the windows. A ripple of chatter moved down the boarding line. "Some dog's out on the runway. I heard he won't let the plane leave. They better get animal control out there." She stepped to the side, squinting through the glass. There he was, the dog. Sitting dead center in front of a $200 million aircraft, like it owed him an explanation. Her journalist brain clicked into gear. She raised her phone and took a picture. Greg leaned forward, looking down at the shepherd still planted on the runway. "That dog's trying to tell us something," he muttered. Vincent raised an eyebrow. "You really believe that?" Greg glanced at him. "I've flown for 28 years. Storms, engines, people trying to bring knives in their shoes. You learn to trust the smallest signs." Inside the terminal, Emily hit send, texting the image to her editor with a simple line. "Something's happening at SeaTac. Give me a day." Ben finally stood up, eyes locked on the plane. He didn't have evidence yet, but he had something better. A dog who never lied. The rain had thickened to a steady rhythm against the airport windows, each droplet a soft percussion in the quiet tension that filled Seattle-Tacoma International. At Gate 27B, Flight SC-1137 was stalled, and for reasons no passenger on board could quite understand, the source of the delay stood on the tarmac in the form of a still, silent German shepherd. Shadow hadn't moved since he first planted himself before the aircraft, and his handler, Ben Carter, stood nearby with a posture that was less defensive than defiant, rooted not in rebellion, but in certainty. Inside the Security Operations Center, a spacious room lined with monitors and soft-lit consoles, Karen Holloway paced slowly. She was in her early 50s, trim and straight-backed, wearing a charcoal blazer over a black blouse, hair cropped close in a no-nonsense cut that matched her no-nonsense approach to leadership. She was known across SeaTac as the one who could read a situation better than any report, a former Department of Homeland Security strategist who now headed airport security with a reputation for composure and quiet force. Her brown eyes flicked from one monitor to another until they landed on the grainy overhead feed of the plane and the motionless dog. She turned to the room. "Where's Carter?" "He's still on the tarmac, Director," a young officer replied. Karen pressed the earpiece tighter. "Get me his channel." Outside, Ben stood with his hand loosely gripping Shadow's lead. Rain soaked the shoulders of his field jacket, but he didn't seem to care. His eyes were locked on his partner. Shadow wasn't barking. He wasn't growling. His body was tight, focused, his breathing slow and even. He had entered what Ben knew as his lock-on state, when every muscle tightened and nothing else in the world existed but the thing he was detecting. Karen's voice crackled through Ben's radio. "Carter, status." Ben raised the radio to his mouth. "He's not moving. Same posture, same focus. It's not random." There was a pause. "What area of the plane is he locked onto?" Ben followed the line of Shadow's gaze. "Somewhere near the rear cargo section. But not exact. He hasn't led me closer yet." In the terminal, passengers grew restless. Whispers spread like heat through the rows of seats. Someone muttered about bomb threats. Another speculated about a missing pilot. The uncertainty made everything louder, Coffee cups clinking, jackets rustling, keyboards tapping. Amid it all, Emily Harris, seated at the edge of the boarding area, kept her phone angled low, capturing photos through the window. She wore a fitted navy coat, damp at the sleeves from earlier, and her sharp gray eyes moved with analytical precision. She had covered bigger chaos in her journalism career, but something about the silence of that dog made her nervous. Her instincts never flared for nothing. On board the aircraft, Flight SC-1137's crew worked to maintain calm. In the galley near row 7, Lena Ortiz, the lead flight attendant, moved with effortless professionalism. She was 35, with kind eyes, short curls tucked behind her ears, and a manner that could soothe even the most difficult passenger. She had done long-haul flights through monsoons, once helped deliver a baby over the Atlantic, and had a knack for knowing when to talk and when to simply listen. Right now, she was doing both. "Ma'am," a woman in 10C called out. "My daughter, I think her asthma's acting up." Lena crouched beside the girl, a red-haired child no older than 6, whose breathing had begun to rasp quietly in her chest. Lena reached for the emergency oxygen canister with smooth efficiency and a soft tone. "You're doing great, sweetheart. Just take slow breaths. I'm here with you." A few rows ahead, Owen Briggs leaned into the aisle, clearly annoyed. Mid-50s, clean-shaven, square jaw, fine wool blazer. His hair was slicked back, slightly thinning at the temples, and his expression flickered between impatience and calculation. He held a leather briefcase between his knees and checked his watch with a sharp glance. His mouth tightened. "Excuse me," he said toward Lena, "is someone going to explain what's going on, or are we all just going to wait here in mystery?" Lena offered a calm smile. "We've been advised there's a delay on the ground, sir. Airport security is investigating a safety protocol." "This has nothing to do with that dog out there, does it?" he asked, voice slightly too loud for comfort. "I can't speak to specifics," she said gently, "but your safety is our highest priority." Briggs muttered something under his breath, then leaned back, hands folded tight. Back outside, Karen Holloway had made her way to the tarmac in person. A black umbrella shielded her as she approached Ben in shadow, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. She spoke low and direct. "Still locked in?" Ben nodded. "Yes, ma'am." His body hasn't shifted once. He's not distracted. Whatever he's sensing, it's still there. Karen watched the dog a moment longer. Then she nodded once. "All right, we're not guessing today." She raised her radio. "Initiate secondary cargo inspection. I want everything pulled from that hold and rescreened manually. No assumptions." Ben exhaled in relief. "Thank you." Karen shot him a look. "Don't thank me yet. If your dog's wrong, I'll be writing apology memos for a month." Ben smirked slightly. "He's not." The inspection began within minutes. Teams arrived with gloves and scanners. Containers were lifted gently from the plane's underside, lined up in a secured hangar nearby. Each was labeled, barcoded, and matched to manifest logs. Shadow didn't move to any specific one. He simply held his gaze on the open bay. Karen walked beside Ben as they observed. "You think he'll give you more once everything's laid out?" "He might. Sometimes he just waits for the scent to shift. He tracks intensity." Inside the terminal, Emily had slipped away from the boarding gate and into the central concourse, pacing as she made a call to her editor. "Something's off," she said into the phone. "There's a K-9 blocking a commercial plane, the passengers are in limbo, and nobody's giving real answers." "Do we even know what the dog's reacting to?" "Not yet," she replied, "but I've seen smuggling cases like this before. Quiet dogs don't stop planes unless it's real." The call ended with her promise to dig further. She returned to the terminal windows just in time to see Shadow shift, barely, his head tilting slightly, a barely there step forward. Ben noticed. Karen narrowed her eyes, and the cargo crew paused, waiting for the dog to do something more. But Shadow just stood there, still silent, eyes focused, unwavering. The rain had softened, but not ceased, creating a cold mist that hung low over the runway like a breath held in suspense. Inside the secured cargo hangar, adjacent to the tarmac, rows of containers stood silent under fluorescent lights. Each one bore official clearance labels, but only one of them had caught the full attention of a dog trained to detect the undetectable. Shadow stood poised beside his handler, Ben Carter. The German Shepherd's coat was slick with moisture, but his body radiated intensity. He fixated on a crate near the end of the second row, not barking, but vibrating with alertness, a trained signal honed through years of trust. His ears were locked forward, nose flaring as if reading the air itself. His stillness was the loudest sound in the room. Ben approached the crate slowly, leash in hand. It was labeled clearly, Electronic Systems, cleared by Blue Hawk Innovations. Destination Atlanta. The manifest indicated server interface hardware, routine equipment for a tech subcontractor. On the surface, everything looked perfectly ordinary, but Shadow's low growl deepened as Ben drew closer. Karen Holloway entered the hangar with brisk steps, rain still glistening on her slate-gray coat. Her eyes immediately found the dog, then Ben. "This the one?" she asked quietly. "He's telling me it is," Ben said. "He's never false alerted a container before, not once." Karen nodded once. "Let's do this clean." The inspection team moved in. Leading them was Luis Mendonza, a meticulous cargo tech in his late 30s, with a mop of curly hair tied back and thin frame glasses perched low on his nose. His neon vest carried the TSA logo, and he spoke in crisp, deliberate sentences. "Scanning the seal now. No breaches, manifest matches, but let's pop the lid." With practiced hands, Luis released the clasps and lifted the lid. Inside were foam-cushioned modules, metal frames, and sealed casings. Each was stamped with the logo of Blue Hawk Innovations, a sleek hawk silhouette inside a blue hexagon. Karen narrowed her eyes. "Blue Hawk. I know that name." "They're a defense subcontractor," Ben added. "Mainly satellite telemetry, encryption hardware, some AI neural relay stuff. Legitimate, but tightly monitored." Luis removed the first row of components. Beneath them, another layer, also clean. But Shadow didn't move. If anything, his body tensed more. Luis tapped the bottom. "There's another panel. Feels thinner than standard." "False bottom?" Karen asked. "Likely. Not in the crate specs. Want it opened?" Karen looked at Ben, then nodded. "Do it." Luis pried open the panel. A thin sheet of composite metal came loose with a subtle crack. Inside, encased in a molded sheath, was a second compartment, unlabeled, unmanifested, and sealed with no obvious latch. An X-ray unit was brought over. As the image loaded, what it revealed made everyone pause. Within the hidden compartment lay a compact cluster of unfamiliar circuitry, dense, shielded, and wired in a closed-loop configuration. There were no ports, no manufacturer stamps, and surrounding it was a fine mesh lining designed to deflect electromagnetic scans. Karen's voice dropped. "That's not for civilian hardware." Luis frowned. "I've done military crates before. This isn't standard tech. It's either prototype or black ops." Karen turned to Ben. "Secure it. Full lockdown. Notify DHS and Special Tech Division." Ben gave Shadow a small pat. "Good work, partner." The crate was immediately transferred to a reinforced unit. Shadow, now seated, panted lightly but kept his eyes on it. He had done his job. But Ben's instincts told him this was just the surface. After signing the evidence chain log, Ben stepped outside under the cover of the hangar awning and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a saved contact. Danny Myers. Danny had been his bunkmate during their early deployment years. A brilliant but paranoid systems engineer, Danny later joined the TSA and helped design portions of their cargo tracking software before he quit out of frustration over internal corruption. These days, he worked freelance security audits and mostly lived off-grid in Oregon. Ben typed, "Need help. Shipment cleared under Blue Hawk. Hidden compartment. Can you pull the route and clearance metadata? ID 443789Z. The reply came back fast. "Whoa, that's above blacklight protocol. Give me 6 HRS. Meanwhile, inside the terminal, Emily Harris watched through a glass panel as the crate was rolled into a sealed unit and carted away. Her camera had caught every moment, the dog's reaction, the false bottom, Karen's order. Her instincts, sharp as ever, screamed this wasn't a fluke. She didn't publish anything yet, but her hands were shaking. She sat at a bench, opened her laptop, and began reviewing footage frame by frame. She noticed something strange. A QR code on the crate's interior panel, partially visible before Luis pulled it open. She zoomed in and screenshotted it. Then, a man's voice interrupted her. "You're Emily Harris, right?" She looked up to see David Lorne, an FAA analyst in his late 40s with sandy brown hair, anxious energy, and tired eyes behind smudged lenses. He wore a windbreaker with a faded badge clipped to the collar. "I saw you filming," he said. "Just be careful with what you publish. This isn't a normal smuggling op." Emily narrowed her eyes. "What do you know?" He hesitated. "Blue Hawk has high clearance contracts. I've flagged anomalies linked to them before. Nothing ever gets followed up. Dogs like yours? They're the only reason anything surfaced." She studied him, then whispered, "So this is bigger." David exhaled slowly. "You're standing on the edge of something built to stay hidden." In the hangar, Karen was still on the phone, her expression tight. "I don't care how routine the manifest looks. There was a concealed compartment under DHS regulation threshold. That's intentional deception. We're not letting this get buried." She hung up and turned back to Ben. "You were right, and your dog just saved us from a public relations disaster, at minimum, or worse." Ben gave a tight nod. "This isn't isolated. I can feel it." Karen didn't disagree. As the rain outside finally softened into a drizzle, the crate disappeared into the back of a black DHS van. But no one in that hangar believed the threat had left with it. They all knew. It had just begun. 3 days had passed since the crate was seized. The Seattle rain had not lifted, and neither had the weight that pressed down on Ben Carter's chest. The morning fog blanketed the airfield like an accusation, smothering the usual airport hum. Inside the sterile walls of a federal operations building tucked behind the east runway, Ben sat beneath a flickering fluorescent light in a windowless room that smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. Across the table sat 2 men in dark suits. The taller one, Agent Malcolm Reese, was in his early 50s, with graying temples, a lean frame, and a face carved in permanent skepticism. His sharp chin was covered in a salt and pepper beard that looked precision-trimmed. He rarely blinked. His partner, Agent Theo Clark, was younger, around 35, with broad shoulders, a buzz cut, and eyes that darted too quickly. He was the kind of man who compensated for inexperience with excessive protocol. Reese leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, you're aware that protocol prohibits direct intervention on a cleared aircraft without prior command-level authorization." Ben didn't flinch. His voice was low but unwavering. "I trusted my dog. Shadow doesn't false alert. If I waited for red tape, that crate would be in Atlanta by now." Clark interjected. "That crate was tagged by Blue Hawk Innovations, federally contracted, cleared through 3 levels of screening." Ben crossed his arms. "And still had a false bottom and an unlisted device. If Shadow hadn't stopped that plane, you wouldn't be sitting here pretending you're just doing your jobs." Reese stared at him for a long moment. Then he slid a document across the table. "Effective immediately. You're being placed under internal review. Suspension of handler privileges. Shadow is being transferred to Joint Task Force 72 in Dallas. He'll be evaluated for high-security deployment." Ben felt the sentence like a slap to the chest. "You're separating him from me because he did his job." Reese replied coldly. "We're protecting national assets. Emotional attachment is not a strategic priority." Ben stood. "No, but truth is..." Outside, he walked to the edge of the parking lot and stopped under a thin canopy. His breath came in sharp bursts in the chill air. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A call. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Carter?" "Ben?" A woman's voice, soft, focused. "It's Emily Harris. We met during the lockdown. Flight SC 1137. "I remember," he replied. "I need to talk to you. I just received something classified." Ben was silent for a moment. "I'm listening." "I got an anonymous email, encrypted. It had an internal security bulletin attached, time-stamped 2 weeks before the incident. It mentions experimental scanning-resistant components, terms like metamaterial shielding, spectral nullification, and, get this, K9 sensory anomaly reports from uncorrelated TSA sectors." Ben's heart sank. They knew. "Exactly," she continued. "There's a note at the bottom, handwritten. Shadow flagged one. Transfer him before he becomes a liability. Someone knew your dog was close to something." Ben's jaw tightened. "Can you forward the email?" "I already did," she said. "Burner address. Check your inbox in 2 minutes. I trust you know how to scrub traces." He did. Emily hung up, and for a moment Ben stood still, surrounded by the distant roar of departing planes. Then he opened his email and found it. Subject line: he shouldn't have smelled that. The attached file included technical blueprints for the hidden device found in the crate. Its purpose? Unknown. But there were keywords: data siphoning, passive neural mapping, airborne latency testing. Whatever it wasn't harmless. Meanwhile, across the city, Emily sat in a quiet corner of a cafe, dressed in a thick green coat, her brown hair tied back into a loose braid. Her skin was pale, eyes a sharp steel gray, and she typed with the quiet determination of someone who didn't need permission to ask dangerous questions. She had tracked stories through war zones, corrupt corporate shells, and failed cover-ups. But this one felt colder, like it was never meant to surface. She opened her encrypted chat app and typed, "Target suppressed, dog reassigned, handler isolated, but he's not stopping." No reply yet. But she wasn't waiting. That evening, Ben drove out of the city, away from the rain-slicked highways and toward a small house in the suburbs where he had raised Shadow since he was a pup. The backyard was empty now, the training rig dismantled. Shadow was already en route to Dallas on a government-chartered flight. He pulled a dusty crate from the garage. Inside were files from his time in Afghanistan. Photos, reports, and old encrypted drives. He found one marked Tachyon Testing, Blue Hawk Satellite Division. It had come from a base near Kandahar, an experimental unit that used modified drones for crowd monitoring. Shadow had sniffed something odd there once, too, a small relay dish coated in strange paint. He remembered now. The scent. It was the same. Ben pulled out his old military laptop, bypassed the biometric lock, and inserted the drive. The data opened with a slow grind. One document stood out. Project Lens, passive behavioral capture via nano-echo relays. It referenced neural echo mapping, technology capable of scanning thought patterns in low-frequency EM bands, and blending into cargo loads under the guise of communications modules. Ben sat back, cold sweat rising on his neck. That device in the crate, it wasn't just dangerous, it was illegal. Weaponized surveillance, disguised and flown across the country under contract protection. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Danny. "Blue Hawk is not working alone. Routing signature pings back to a private shell group in Zurich. Want me to dig deeper?" Ben typed, "Dig everything," quietly. Seattle's gray sky had turned into a painter's wash of ochre and slate as the city dipped into early evening. Streetlights blinked on like cautious eyes. In a quiet co-working space in Belltown, behind layers of firewalls and anonymized networks, Emily Harris and Ben Carter sat hunched over a laptop glowing with streams of encrypted metadata. Both looked worn. Ben in a washed-out green hoodie, his jaw stiff from days without sleep, and Emily in her evergreen trench, her hair pulled back, cheeks flushed from the walk over. The screen displayed a compiled map of flight paths from the past 6 months, all starting from different points, but sharing one eerie consistency: identical layovers and final destinations. On the map, red dots bled across American airspace like an infection. "Each one carried cargo under Blue Hawk," Emily muttered, "all marked as level B or below, just under the threshold for full inspection." Ben leaned in. "You ran the routing signatures?" Emily nodded. "With Danny's backdoor script. Look." She clicked on a node. It expanded into a detailed log. SE 8475, Denver to Atlanta, cleared through Memphis. Manifest, electronics, civilian comm arrays. Transport ID BH 2076G. She clicked again. SE 1137, the same pattern. Ben rubbed his temple. "It's not just one crate. This is a system, coordinated, shielded. They've been moving this stuff nationwide. And the only reason we found one," Emily said, "was because of Shadow." Ben exhaled. He was just the first to call them out. Emily's eyes narrowed, which means there could be dozens of shipments that slipped through. They sat in silence for a beat before Ben added, "We need to look at passengers. Someone's flying with those crates." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You think it's human-assisted?" Ben nodded. "Too many layers for automation. Someone's validating this movement on the ground." She dug into another data set and pulled up passenger manifests. "Let's cross-reference recurring names." The system churned. Moments later, one name blinked through 5 manifests. Owen Briggs. Emily blinked. He was on SC 1137. Ben frowned. Middle seat, cabin 4, nervous. Emily pulled up his profile. Briggs was listed as a corporate consultant with a flexible itinerary, registered to a Shell LLC, Beldridge Systems. No website, no listed contracts. Ben murmured, "He's either an asset mover or an observer." "I'll keep digging on him," Emily said. "You have someone in Dallas who can check on Shadow?" Ben's jaw clenched. "I'll figure something out." Later that night, Emily made her way across the city to the University District. On the third floor of a quiet, ivy-draped building at the University of Washington, she entered a small, dimly lit office filled with rolled schematics, microscopes, and a cluttered whiteboard. Behind a mountain of technical journals stood Dr. Clara Reynolds, a tall, angular woman in her early 50s with cropped silver hair, sharp cheekbones, and penetrating blue eyes. She wore a navy turtleneck and slacks, her manner brisk and pointed. "You came alone?" Clara asked. Emily nodded. "You said you wouldn't talk unless it was in person." Clara sat. "That's because I've already been burned once. Blue Hawk shut down my department last year. I was working on metamaterial shielding, designed for use in drone surveillance. Low reflection index, invisible to X-ray. I designed it for battlefield rescue operations. But they repurposed it, turned it into something darker." Emily placed her phone on the table and pressed play. The video of Shadow growling at the crate played in the silent office. Clara leaned forward, her fingers steepled. "That's your trigger." Emily frowned. "What?" Clara pointed. "The way the dog reacts. That level of intensity, it's not chemical, it's electrical. EM distortion. That material, it hums. Dogs feel it before scanners do. I tested it once near a therapy dog during a lab demo. Same reaction." Emily's heart quickened. "So Shadow wasn't smelling something?" Clara shook her head. "He was sensing it." "And why is it dangerous?" Clara stood, pacing. "Because it can be embedded into anything. Satellite relays, drone components, even passive surveillance gear. It transmits silent pings. And if Blue Hawk is deploying it under cargo logs, they're mapping behavior, without consent. Possibly even brainwave patterns." Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Do you have proof?" Clara gestured to a filing cabinet. "All locked in paper. I've kept copies. But if they find out I've talked—" Emily rose. "You'll be protected." Clara laughed bitterly. "No one gets protected from people who erase their own footprints." Back at the co-working space, Ben got a text from a number he hadn't used in years. It was from an old handler contact now stationed in Dallas. "Your dog's here, eyes wide, restless. He's looking for you." Ben stared at the screen, then looked out the window at the city beneath him. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The fluorescent lights buzzed low above the makeshift lab space tucked into the north wing of the University of Washington's Engineering Research Annex. Dust drifted through beams of bluish light slicing in from a narrow window, illuminating the particles like silent witnesses. Clara Reynolds stood hunched over a steel workbench, her long fingers moving delicately through layers of shielding, tweezers in hand, her breath held steady. Beside her, Ben and Emily watched with rapt attention. Neither had spoken for the last 10 minutes. Clara finally broke the silence, her voice sharp but calm. "There, that's it." She held up a coin-sized square of dark material, near black, but under the light, it shimmered like oil, an iridescent sheen that bent and absorbed every beam that touched it. It was impossibly thin, flexible, almost organic in movement. Clara laid it beneath the scanning lens connected to her microscope and adjusted the focus. "Metamaterial mesh," she said. "Third-generation stealth polymer. We called it Spectrix when I was working under DoD. It mimics background noise in the electromagnetic spectrum, makes objects invisible to scanning arrays." Emily leaned closer. "So this is what was in the crate?" Clara nodded. "Same compound structure. But what worries me isn't the material, it's the evolution. This version is finer, more precise. Someone's been developing it past the military prototypes." Ben crossed his arms. "And deploying it on commercial planes." Clara glanced at him. "That's the part that terrifies me." She tapped a key on her laptop, displaying a split screen. The Spectra X scan, side by side with the sample Emily retrieved from the crate. Identical. down to the molecular alignment. You know what's worse? Clara added. This stuff can carry trace chemicals, synthetic pheromones, neural primers. Combine that with behavioral mapping technology, and you don't just spy, you influence. Ben stepped back, Shadow's image flashing in his mind, the still stance, the low growl, the refusal to yield. He now understood why the dog had reacted the way he did. Shadow didn't just smell the material, he knew it was wrong. As Clara stored the samples in a vacuum-sealed container, Emily's phone buzzed on the table, a single message from an encrypted app. They know, get out now. Emily's face went pale. We've been tracked. Ben was already pulling on his jacket. Let's go. Separate cars. We regroup at the safe point. Outside, the university campus was deceptively calm. Students wandered with headphones, couples shared umbrellas. The rain had returned in thin sheets. But Ben's eyes scanned every corner, every parked car. He knew how this worked. He had seen it before overseas. Truth didn't die quietly. It was silenced. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C., in the sterile boardroom of a private government contracting building just 2 blocks from the Capitol, Richard Langford stood with one hand braced against the glass wall, looking down on the marble steps below. Langford, a man in his early 60s with silver hair slicked back and a hawk-like nose, wore a bespoke navy suit. His face was smooth, but his eyes were sunken, cold, sharp, calculating. He had the look of someone who had never lost a negotiation, but had won many wars without firing a bullet. Across from him sat 3 men in various shades of government anonymity. Black suits, beige folders, one with a DHS pin, another with an NSA badge flipped upside down on purpose. Langford didn't speak at first. He turned slowly and laid a single report on the table. A photo of Shadow standing in front of the SE, 1137 aircraft, tail straight, stance defiant. This dog has cost us 6 months of movement, Langford said flatly. And now, the handler is talking to media. The reporter has accessed materials from a disgraced academic. The whole thing is one pulse away from exposure. One of the agents spoke. We've initiated a campaign to cloud the narrative. Online chatter, a faked handler misconduct report, and a new story about untrained K-9 units grounding flights. It'll bury attention. Langford nodded once. Good. What about the dog? The youngest agent hesitated. He's with Task Force 72, under lock. Langford's voice dropped. Not good enough. I want him retrieved, quietly, and brought here. Another folder was opened. Inside, surveillance stills of Shadow's training records, Ben's military profile, and recent photos of Emily and Clara. Langford tapped the table. Find them all, extract what they know, use consent if possible, use force if necessary. Back in Seattle, Emily and Ben regrouped in a safe house on the edge of Snohomish County, a cabin buried in thick pines, owned by one of Ben's former Army brothers. Inside, the lights were off. Only a single lamp glowed in the corner, casting long shadows on the floor. Shadow lay curled near the fireplace, eyes half closed, ears twitching at every creak. When Ben stepped inside, Shadow rose immediately, walked over, and pressed his head into Ben's leg. Ben crouched, embracing the dog, his voice barely above a whisper. You found it first, buddy. We're going to finish this. Emily sat on the floor beside them, her laptop open. The files Clara had given her were now mirrored onto a secure drive. She opened a window with the name Exposure Package. Ben looked over. What's that? Emily's fingers hovered. The truth. If anything happens to us, it leaks to 50 media outlets at once. Ben met her gaze. Then let's make sure we're the ones who hit send. Outside, the wind carried the first real chill of winter. Somewhere in D.C., people were plotting. But here, in this quiet room with a dog who saw what scanners could not, the war for truth had just begun. The morning was cloaked in a dense fog as the gravel road leading to the K-9 tactical training facility wound its way through the pine-clad hills outside of Seattle. The dew clung to every blade of grass, and the scent of wet earth and timber filled the air. It was a place far from city noise, where echoes of barking and discipline replaced traffic and static. Once, this had been where Ben Carter taught loyalty, instinct, and obedience. Now, it was the only place left where secrets could be aired in safety. Ben stood by the rusted entrance gate, his figure cast in silhouette against the mist. He wore a black utility jacket, jeans, and hiking boots, and his face bore the rough texture of sleepless nights. Deep lines at the corners of his eyes, stubble dusting his jawline, and eyes alert like a soldier under siege. Next to him, Shadow sat in perfect stillness, his golden coat slightly damp, his deep brown eyes sweeping the perimeter with precision. A low growl rumbled in his throat as headlights approached. A silver SUV rolled to a halt. Emily stepped out first, hair tied into a practical ponytail, wearing a weathered green jacket and slim-fit jeans. Her skin was pale, her eyes sharp and skeptical as ever, carrying the fatigue of someone living on adrenaline and coffee. She gave Ben a nod. Behind her stepped out Captain Greg Wallace, the veteran pilot of SC 1137. Greg was in his early 50s, barrel-chested, still carrying the quiet authority of decades in the cockpit. His gray hair was neatly combed back, and his neatly trimmed beard framed a face marked with conviction. He had resigned after the incident. He couldn't fly, knowing something had been smuggled past him. Clara arrived last, parking her modest hybrid sedan behind the others. She wore a dark overcoat, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, and carried a hard-shell case full of documents and samples. Despite her elegant movements, there was a fire in her eyes, like someone who had waited too long to be heard. They gathered inside the old command room, now silent, except for the hum of a portable generator and the occasional bark from dogs in the adjacent kennels. On the cracked whiteboard, Clara sketched a basic flowchart linking Blue Hawk to the shipments, overlapping with surveillance logistics and overlapping personnel like Owen Briggs. Ben handed over the drive. Everything we have, flight logs, passenger overlaps, shipment IDs, and the material scans. Greg looked grim. And this goes to... A new voice answered from the doorway. To the right ears, said Special Agent Leona Park of the FBI. She stepped into the room, mid-40s, Korean-American, with short black hair, broad shoulders, and a long navy coat that revealed her badge only when the light hit it just right. Her expression was unreadable but alert. I've been working with Senator Halverson's office. You called, I listened. Emily tilted her head. How do we know you're not one of them? Leona met her gaze. Because I've been trying to crack this pipeline for 2 years. But until your dog stopped that plane, I didn't have a thread to pull. She looked at Shadow. Turns out, your golden boy is the only one with a real nose for corruption. They sat down together and began reviewing the compiled evidence. Clara detailed the technological evolution of Spectrex, the shift from rescue-grade camo material to data collection deployment. Emily showed the video clips of Shadow reacting, alongside heat maps of the shipment routes. Ben added context from military missions that had previously brushed against similar tech. Greg, though less technical, provided a damning perspective from within aviation, how Blue Hawk's certifications often bypassed normal safety thresholds. Leona opened her folder. Senator Halverson has been building a case against Blue Hawk, but she needed proof, undeniable, public, and immediate. What you've brought might be it. But the moment felt too brief. A loud crack rang through the building, glass shattering in one of the far rooms. Ben stood instantly. Stay low. Shadow bristled, snarling toward the training wing. Leona drew her firearm. Secure the perimeter. No one leaves. Emily crouched behind an overturned table. Clara moved to shut the data case. Greg picked up a heavy metal rod from beside the door, his instinct not dulled by years in the sky. Ben and Shadow moved through the training corridor, low-lit, lined with kennels and storage closets. Footsteps echoed from the far end, quick and deliberate. Then Shadow froze. His nose twitched, and with a low snarl, he lunged toward one of the storage lockers, scratching rapidly. Ben opened it and found a small black box no larger than a deck of cards attached to the back wall with magnets. Listening device, he growled. They were monitoring us. Behind them, a figure in black ran toward the back exit. Leona intercepted, her voice sharp. FBI! Freeze! The man bolted. She fired once, grazing the shoulder. He went down hard. Back in the command room, Emily checked the external feeds. 3 more figures, all dressed in dark tactical gear, had retreated to a black van parked just outside the fence. But the camera caught something else, a shadowed insignia on the vehicle's side panel. Theta. Not military, not federal, private. Langford had sent his dogs. Shadow barked violently, pacing the room, nostrils flared, tail rigid. He was still in high alert mode when Leona returned. "They were after the dog," she said. "That device wasn't for us. It was to track Shadow's behavioral responses. They're trying to reverse engineer what makes him effective." Clara's voice dropped. "They want to build a synthetic Shadow." Emily stared at her. "Weaponized detection." Leona turned toward Ben. "This is no longer just about illegal tech. It's about biological targeting, behavioral manipulation. This changes everything." Ben looked down at Shadow. "He's not a tool, he's a soul, and he's the reason we're still alive." Leona nodded. "Then we need to go public, now." The morning air was crisp with late autumn chill, the Seattle sky a smooth watercolor of slate and silver. A gentle breeze stirred golden leaves along the sidewalk outside the federal courthouse, where the nation's attention had turned. Reporters buzzed with questions. Camera lenses glinted like watchful eyes. And just inside, a verdict that had trembled in shadows for months was finally spoken aloud. Richard Langford, once the untouchable CEO of Blue Hawk Innovations, now stood cuffed and expressionless beneath the cold weight of justice. His tailored navy suit hung loosely, as if it no longer belonged to the man wearing it. His face, once handsome and decisive, was hollowed by sleepless nights and sealed court documents. Langford had been charged with conspiracy, illegal development and deployment of biometric surveillance technologies, manipulation of air traffic security protocols, and obstruction of justice. Devices meant to spy on populations through commercial flights, masked with untraceable cloaking polymers, were now sitting in locked evidence containers. The network had crumbled because of a dog. Outside, the city held its breath. At the Seattle Airport K-9 Tactical Training Center, newly renovated and expanded, a very different scene unfolded. Rows of handlers in full dress uniforms stood at attention. Cameras flashed. Families lined the paths, children waving flags. The American anthem swelled in the background as the gates opened and two figures emerged. Ben Carter, now wearing the navy blue command uniform of the director of K-9 operations for the Seattle Airport Security Force, his polished badge gleaming on his chest, and beside him, Shadow, proud and poised, wearing a service harness newly fitted with a golden insignia shaped like a flame curled around a paw. Ben's hair had grown out slightly, a light beard shadowing his jaw, but his stride was steady, his shoulders squared. The weight he'd carried for months was not gone, but it had transformed into a purpose that radiated through every inch of him. Shadow, now 5 years old, walked in perfect step, his golden fur brushed and bright under the autumn light. Ben took the podium to a standing ovation. He paused a moment, resting his hand on Shadow's head before speaking. "When you work with dogs, you learn one simple truth. They don't lie, they don't calculate, they just know. And when we trust them, truly trust them, we're often saved from things we couldn't begin to see." He nodded once and stepped back. The governor of Washington stepped forward and presented Shadow with the Medal for Distinguished Service to National Security, the first ever awarded to a K-9. Shadow barked once, as if acknowledging the moment, before sitting back with a gentle dignity. His amber eyes scanned the crowd, not with vanity, but with quiet awareness. He didn't know what a medal was, but he knew love and loyalty. Then came Emily Harris, in a navy blazer over a white blouse, her brown hair pulled into a soft braid, her cheeks flushed with emotion as she approached the podium. The crowd hushed. "When the story began, I was chasing corruption, but what I found was a different kind of truth. A truth carried not on paper or broadcast waves, but in a heartbeat, a gesture, a growl. Amid our blind faith in machines, it was a dog's nose that smelled danger, and a man's heart that chose to believe it." She held up a hardcover book, its cover painted with the silhouette of Shadow standing against the wing of an airplane under a dusky sky. The title, "The Dog Who Stopped the Sky." The book would go on to top national bestseller lists for 15 weeks, translated into 17 languages, and assigned in journalism ethics courses across the country. Elsewhere, justice rippled forward. Clara Reynolds, reinstated and appointed lead researcher in a new federal oversight initiative for sensory and cloaking technologies, now headed a think tank focused on preventing future abuses. She stood quietly in the audience, glasses perched on her nose, a proud half-smile playing across her lips. A quiet force, now rightfully returned to her post. Greg Wallace, wearing the dress blues of an honorary Air Command officer, had retired from flying commercial planes, but he now taught advanced aviation ethics and crisis response at the Seattle Aeronautics Institute. His voice, firm, gravelly, reassuring, now guided the next generation of pilots not just in flight, but in responsibility. And the FBI's agent Leona Park, still crisp and unreadable in her demeanor, oversaw a multi-agency task force built around dismantling domestic tech-based trafficking. She declined all interviews. After the ceremony, as most guests filtered out and the brass bands faded, Ben stood near the edge of the training field, watching Shadow chase a tennis ball across the grass. The sun broke through the clouds just then, streaking gold across the back fences. A breeze moved gently, ruffling his uniform. 3 young trainees approached, one a tall, wiry woman with freckles and a buzz cut, another a soft-spoken man with dark-rimmed glasses, and a third with an eager German shepherd pup straining at his leash. "Director Carter," the woman asked, "we just wanted to say we're honored to train under you. If there's time, we'd like guidance on prepping a scent recognition rotation." Ben smiled, genuinely, peacefully. He looked down at Shadow, now sitting beside him, tongue lolling lazily, metal catching the sunlight. Then he turned to the recruits. "We can teach dogs 100 different scents, explosives, narcotics, missing persons, even illness." He paused, then added with quiet conviction, "But the hardest thing is teaching humans to listen when the dog speaks." He turned toward the runway in the far distance, where planes continued to rise and fall, where stories began and ended. And behind him, the new generation of handlers stood ready. In a world obsessed with power, technology, and control, it wasn't a satellite or a sensor that stopped a secret empire. It was the loyalty of a dog and the faith of a man who chose to listen. Shadow didn't speak, but God gave him a voice no machine could silence. And through Ben's unwavering trust, that silent voice became the trumpet of truth. Maybe that's how miracles arrive, not in thunder or fire, but in fur and footsteps, in instinct and love. So if you ever feel small, unheard, or powerless, remember, God often chooses the quietest hearts to carry the loudest truths. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it with someone who still believes in good. Leave us a comment below about a moment when your pet, or someone you love, helped you hear God's whisper. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where hope walks on 4 paws. May the Lord bless you and guide your steps, just as He guided Shadow's.